The macabre history of the Norrises. They hid 7 kids below an abandoned hotel. The Grand Vista Hotel had once been the crown jewel of Copper Ridge, Nevada, a small mining town that thrived during the silver boom of the early 1900s. Its elegant Victorian architecture and 3-story facade had welcomed traveling businessmen, prosperous miners, and their families for nearly 4 decades. But by 1982, the mines had closed, the tourists had stopped coming, and the Grand Vista had joined the growing collection of abandoned buildings that dotted the American West like forgotten tombstones. For 37 years, the hotel stood empty, its windows boarded up and its grand entrance sealed with heavy chains. Local teenagers occasionally dared each other to explore its darkened hallways, but most residents of Copper Ridge simply ignored the decaying structure, treating it as just another relic of their town's more prosperous past. That willful blindness ended on a crisp October morning in 2019, when a demolition crew hired by the county made a discovery that would shatter the quiet normalcy of Copper Ridge forever. The demolition of the Grand Vista was part of a broader urban renewal project aimed at revitalizing the town's historic district. As the crew began excavating the hotel's foundation, they expected to find the typical debris of decades-old construction: rotted timber, rusted pipes, and perhaps some artifacts from the building's operational years. Instead, they found evidence of habitation where none should have existed. Foreman Jake Sullivan had been working demolition jobs for over 20 years, but nothing had prepared him for what his crew uncovered beneath the hotel's basement floor. Hidden beneath layers of concrete and carefully concealed by false walls was an elaborate network of underground rooms, each meticulously constructed and clearly designed for long-term human occupation. The subterranean complex wasn't a random collection of storage spaces or utility rooms. These were living quarters, complete with sleeping areas, rudimentary cooking facilities, and makeshift bathrooms. Most disturbing of all were the security measures: heavy doors that could only be opened from the outside, barred windows that provided no means of escape, and a ventilation system that could be controlled remotely. But it was what the demolition crew found in those hidden rooms that transformed a routine construction project into one of Nevada's most haunting criminal investigations. In the largest of the underground chambers, investigators discovered 7 children ranging in age from approximately 4 to 16 years old. They were alive, but their condition spoke to years of isolation, malnutrition, and psychological abuse that defied comprehension. The children, pale and malnourished, showed signs of having lived their entire lives in artificial light. Their social development was severely stunted, their speech patterns primitive, and their understanding of the outside world virtually non-existent. Medical examinations revealed that the youngest children had never seen sunlight, while the oldest could barely remember life before their underground imprisonment. Detective Maria Santos of the Nevada State Police had investigated numerous cases of child abuse and neglect during her 15-year career. But the Grand Vista discovery represented something entirely unprecedented. As she descended into the underground complex for the first time, she found herself confronting a crime that seemed to exist outside the normal categories of human cruelty. The children's living conditions, while austere and psychologically devastating, showed signs of careful planning and long-term maintenance. The rooms were clean, the air circulation adequate, and basic nutritional needs had been met. This wasn't a case of simple abandonment or neglect. Someone had invested considerable time, money, and effort into creating and maintaining this underground prison. The question that haunted Detective Santos from the beginning was simple yet terrifying: who had done this, and why? The answer began to emerge as investigators traced the ownership history of the Grand Vista Hotel. The building had been purchased in 1983, just 1 year after its closure, by a seemingly unremarkable couple named Robert and Catherine Norris. The purchase had been handled through a series of shell companies and legal trusts, that had obscured the true identity of the buyers for decades. Robert Norris, 68 years old at the time of the discovery, had presented himself to the Copper Ridge community as a retired businessman who occasionally visited his investment property to assess its condition. Catherine Norris, 64, was described by neighbors in their actual residence in Reno as a quiet, intensely private woman who rarely socialized and seemed to have no close friends or family. But the Norrises' carefully constructed facade began to crumble as investigators delved deeper into their background and activities. Bank records revealed regular purchases of food, clothing, and supplies in quantities far exceeding what two elderly people would require. Medical records showed that Catherine Norris had given birth to multiple children over the years, but no documentation existed of these children attending school, receiving medical care, or having any official existence whatsoever. The children found in the underground complex were, investigators realized, the Norris' own offspring, 7 sons and daughters who had been hidden from society since birth, raised in complete isolation beneath the abandoned hotel. As forensic psychologist Dr. Amanda Rice began working with the rescued children, the full scope of the Norris' psychological manipulation became clear. The children had been told that the outside world was dangerous and toxic, that they were the only family left alive after a great catastrophe, and that their parents were protecting them from unnamed horrors above ground. This elaborate deception had been maintained through careful control of information and environment. The children had never seen television, read newspapers, or had contact with anyone outside their immediate family. Their education had been limited to basic literacy and numeracy, supplemented by religious instruction that emphasized obedience, isolation, and fear of the outside world. The oldest child, 16-year-old Michael Norris, had been designated as a helper in maintaining the younger children. His testimony provided investigators with crucial insights into the family's daily routine and the psychological methods his parents had used to maintain control. Michael described a world of rigid schedules, constant surveillance, and punishment for any behavior that suggested curiosity about life beyond their underground home. The construction of the underground complex had been a multi-year project that Robert Norris had undertaken largely by himself. Using his background in construction and engineering, he had excavated the space beneath the hotel's basement, installed utilities, and created what amounted to a completely self-contained living environment. The project had required careful planning to avoid detection, with materials being delivered at night and construction work conducted during hours when the sounds wouldn't attract attention. The complexity of the project suggested that Robert Norris had been planning this isolation from the beginning of his marriage to Catherine. The couple had moved to Nevada in 1981, purchased the hotel in 1983, and completed the underground construction by 1985. Their first child had been born in 1986, delivered at home with no medical professionals present and no birth certificate filed. As investigators reconstructed the timeline, they realized that the Norrises had essentially created their own private world, completely disconnected from society's laws, norms, and oversight. For over 30 years, they had raised 7 children in complete secrecy, maintaining absolute control over every aspect of their lives. The children's rescue had been traumatic in itself. Their first exposure to sunlight had been painful, their first interactions with strangers terrifying. They had no concept of modern technology, no understanding of contemporary society, and no framework for processing the reality that their parents had lied to them about the fundamental nature of the world. Dr. Rice's preliminary assessments revealed severe developmental delays, profound social anxiety, and symptoms consistent with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The children would require years of intensive therapy and support to develop even basic life skills and emotional regulation capabilities. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that the children still loved and missed their parents, despite the abuse they had endured. The psychological conditioning had been so complete that many of them viewed their rescue as a kidnapping and their rescuers as the real villains in their story. As Chapter 1 of the investigation concluded, Detective Santos found herself grappling with questions that extended far beyond the specific crimes of Robert and Catherine Norris. How have a family of 9 people lived in complete secrecy for over 3 decades? What had motivated parents to impose such extreme isolation on their own children? And most troubling of all, how many other families might be living similar hidden existences, completely disconnected from society's awareness or protection? The abandoned Grand Vista Hotel, once a symbol of Copper Ridge's bygone prosperity, had become the site of one of America's most extreme cases of family isolation and child abuse. As investigators prepared to examine the full scope of the Norrises' crimes, they realized they were confronting not just individual cruelty, but a systematic rejection of society itself that had created its own twisted alternative reality beneath the ground. The answers to these questions would emerge as the investigation deepened, revealing the psychological and ideological motivations that had driven the Norrises to create their underground kingdom of control and fear. The arrest of Robert and Catherine Norris in October 2019 marked the beginning of an investigation that would reveal one of the most systematic cases of family isolation and psychological manipulation in American criminal history. As federal and state investigators worked to understand the full scope of their crimes, they uncovered a carefully constructed ideology that had justified 3 decades of child imprisonment and abuse. Robert Norris, it emerged, had not been a typical businessman before retreating to his underground kingdom. Military records revealed that he had served in Vietnam as a combat engineer, where he had witnessed the collapse of American military efforts and developed profound paranoia about social institutions and government authority. His experience in Southeast Asia had left him convinced that American society was fundamentally corrupt and destined for collapse. This paranoia had been reinforced by his involvement with various survivalist and anti-government groups during the 1970s. FBI records showed that Norris had attended meetings of extremist organizations that preached the coming collapse of civilization and the need for true believers to separate themselves from mainstream society. While he had never been arrested or formally investigated, he had absorbed the movement's core message that survival required complete self-reliance and absolute mistrust of outside authority. Catherine Norris, née Catherine Holt, had brought her own psychological vulnerabilities to the relationship. Raised in a fundamentalist religious community that emphasized female submission and isolation from secular influences, she had been conditioned from childhood to accept male authority. Without question, her marriage to Robert in 1980 had represented not just a personal union, but an alliance between 2 individuals already predisposed to reject mainstream society. The couple's decision to create their underground family compound had been driven by a toxic combination of religious extremism, anti-government paranoia, and Robert's grandiose belief that he was protecting his family from an inevitable social collapse. In his mind, the underground complex wasn't a prison, it was an ark, preserving his genetic line and ideological purity until he deemed it safe to emerge. Court documents revealed that Robert had maintained detailed journals throughout the 34 years of the family's isolation. These writings provided investigators with unprecedented insight into the psychological evolution of extreme family control and the methods used to maintain absolute authority over his children. The journals revealed that Robert had developed an elaborate mythology around their situation, creating a narrative framework that justified their isolation while maintaining his position as the family's absolute authority. According to his version of events, the outside world had been contaminated by moral decay, racial mixing, and government oppression. He presented himself as a visionary who had saved his family from these corrupting influences. Catherine's role in this system had been that of enforcer and indoctrinator. While Robert handled the physical maintenance of their underground world, Catherine had been responsible for the daily education and psychological conditioning of their children. Her religious background had provided the framework for a curriculum that emphasized obedience, purity, and absolute faith in parental authority. The children's education had been carefully controlled to reinforce their parents' worldview while preventing them from developing critical thinking skills that might lead to questioning. They had been taught basic literacy and numeracy, but their reading materials had been limited to approved religious texts and selected historical accounts that supported their parents' narrative of social decay and collapse. Most insidiously, the children had been taught to fear and mistrust their own curiosity about the outside world. Questions about life beyond their underground home were treated as signs of moral weakness or corruption. The few times children had expressed desire to see the surface world, they had been subjected to psychological punishment that included isolation, food restriction, and intensive religious indoctrination. Designed to eliminate such dangerous thoughts, the rescue and rehabilitation of the 7 Norris children presented unprecedented challenges for child welfare authorities and mental health professionals. Dr. Amanda Rice, who led the therapeutic team, found herself dealing with cases that fell outside all existing categories of child abuse and neglect. The oldest child, Michael, had been designated by his father as the eventual successor to leadership of the family. At 16, he possessed the most advanced education and had been given limited authority over his younger siblings. His psychological profile revealed a complex mixture of trauma and indoctrination that made his rehabilitation particularly challenging. Michael had internalized many of his father's beliefs about the outside world, but he had also begun to develop doubts about the truth of his parents' claims. His position as assistant to his father had given him access to information and responsibilities that had gradually revealed inconsistencies in the family's founding mythology. The rescue had been simultaneously traumatic and liberating for him. He was the only child who showed any sign of relief at being removed from the underground complex. That the younger children presented different challenges. 14-year-old Sarah had been identified by her parents as potentially rebellious and had been subjected to particularly intensive psychological control. Her therapy sessions revealed deep-seated fear of expressing independent thoughts or desires, combined with severe anxiety about making any decisions without explicit parental approval. The 3 middle children, David, 12, Jennifer, 10, and Matthew, 8, showed classic signs of institutional dependence, having never been required to make choices or solve problems independently. Their social development had been severely stunted, and they struggled with basic interpersonal skills that most children develop naturally through peer interaction. The 2 youngest children, Rebecca, 6, and Timothy, 4, had known no other existence than their underground home. For them, the surface world was genuinely alien, filled with overwhelming sensory experiences and incomprehensible social expectations. Their adaptation required careful, gradual exposure to normal childhood experiences under intensive therapeutic supervision. As the legal case against Robert and Catherine Norris proceeded, prosecutors faced unusual challenges in categorizing their crimes. Traditional charges of child abuse and neglect seemed inadequate to address the systematic nature of their actions and the sophisticated methods they had used to maintain control. The prosecution ultimately pursued charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit child abuse. The kidnapping charges were particularly significant as they recognized that the children had been held against their will despite being in the custody of their biological parents. Robert Norris's defense team attempted to argue that their client had been motivated by genuine concern for his family's welfare and had provided adequate care within his belief system. They portrayed him as a misguided but loving father who had been trying to protect his children from what he perceived as genuine dangers in mainstream society. This defense strategy backfired when prosecutors introduced evidence from Roberts' journals that revealed his enjoyment of the absolute power he wielded over his family. The writings showed that his motivation had evolved over time from ideological conviction to sadistic pleasure in controlling every aspect of his children's lives. Catherine Norris's defense centered on claims of psychological manipulation and domestic abuse by her husband. Her attorneys argued that she had been as much a victim as her children, trapped in a system of control that had gradually escalated over decades. While there was evidence supporting Catherine's victimization, prosecutors successfully demonstrated that she had been an active participant in maintaining the family's isolation and had personally implemented many of the psychological control mechanisms used on the children. The trial, which lasted 6 months, became a media sensation that raised uncomfortable questions about parental rights, religious freedom, and the limits of state authority over family decisions. Legal experts debated whether parents had the right to raise their children in complete isolation from mainstream society, even if basic physical needs were met. In June 2021, Robert Norris was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole on multiple counts of kidnapping and child endangerment. Catherine Norris received a sentence of 40 years to life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The sentences reflected the court's recognition that their crimes represented not momentary lapses in judgment, but decades of systematic psychological abuse. The rehabilitation of the 7 Norris children continued long after their parents' conviction. Placed in specialized therapeutic foster care, they slowly began the process of learning to navigate a world they had been taught to fear and mistrust. Michael, the oldest, eventually developed sufficient independence to testify at his parents' trial, providing crucial evidence about the family's daily life and his parents' methods of control. His testimony was particularly powerful because it demonstrated both the depth of his trauma and his growing ability to think critically about his experiences. The younger children's progress was slower but steady. With intensive therapy and gradual exposure to normal social experiences, they began to develop the emotional and social skills that had been systematically suppressed during their underground years. By 2023, 4 years after their rescue, all 7 children had made significant progress in their rehabilitation. While they continued to struggle with anxiety and trust issues, they had begun to form healthy relationships with their foster families and therapeutic support teams. The Grand Vista hotel site was eventually converted into a memorial park honoring all children who have suffered from extreme forms of family abuse and isolation. The underground complex was filled with concrete and sealed permanently, but the site serves as a reminder of the importance of maintaining vigilance for families living in extreme isolation. The Norris case prompted legislative changes in Nevada and several other states, establishing new protocols for identifying and investigating families who attempt to completely remove their children from societal oversight. These laws recognize that extreme isolation itself could constitute a form of child abuse, regardless of the parents' stated motivations. The macabre history of the Norris family serves as a disturbing reminder that parental love and protection can be twisted into instruments of control and abuse. Their story demonstrates how ideological extremism, psychological manipulation, and absolute power can create private worlds of suffering that exist completely outside society's awareness or protection. Today, the 7 Norris children continue their journey toward healing and independence, supported by therapeutic professionals who understand the unique challenges of recovering from extreme family control. Their courage in adapting to a world they had been taught to fear serves as a testament to human resilience and the possibility of healing, even from the most systematic forms of psychological abuse. The abandoned hotel that once concealed their suffering has been transformed into a symbol of hope and recovery. ensuring that their story will continue to educate and inspire efforts to protect all children from those who would use parental authority as a weapon against the vulnerable and innocent. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,